Richard, some interesting changes as far as farmers are concerned in New Zealand.
A lot of environmental regulation changes right throughout New Zealand, part of the Resource Management Act changes through land and water plans. What it's doing is putting quite a burden onto, or from Ravensdown's perspective, looking at our expertise around soil management, running the overseer model, which is a nutrient budgeting model. So much of the regulations now phrased around that, that we're finding a lot of pressure on our teams. We have 70 agri-managers, for instance, doing work on farms, traditionally working with overseer, but the regulatory context it's now being put into is making a real difference to how we have to operate. The things that are kind of catching us out in terms of quantum is, say, using Canterbury for example, quickly moving to new systems where we could be anticipating up to 2,000 existing farms needing a resource consent to operate. That's looking at their nitrate leaching and modelling their farms around their nitrogen losses. Farmers also having to do baselines to understand where they are now, kind of in this grandparenting regime where between 2009 to 2013 it sets their levels of what their nutrient loss is, which depending on the rules within their own area may not be able to be exceeded. And so there's a lot of work in that's 4 years of old data, forming a new overseer model, calling it the baseline. Then after that you might need to do annual updates to check that you're compliant with the figures from those benchmark years, 2009 to 13. And then on top of that, we've got a lot of discussion around farm environmental plans, which is also being encouraged, not just in Canterbury, but right across New Zealand. All of these things are quite labour intensive, and the numbers involved, because of the number of farmers involved across all catchments is so high that the skill level requirements are high and the resources are somewhat limited.
So it's really just a case of getting their feet on the ground?
I think with the way some of the regulation is going, that will be the final outcome. There just will not be enough feet on the ground. So from Ravensdown's perspective, we've prioritised where we want to focus, and that's been around adding value around overseer and the nutrient budgets there. We've tackled it from two angles. If a farm is having to go for a consent, we've developed a Ravensdown Environmental, a very specialist team that helps through the consent process. If it's more around the baseline, just trying to get the standard data together, where assuming the farming system doesn't change too much, then they should be able to hold within the baseline. We're looking at a nutrient budgeting processing team to do that work, which is helping to collect the data from the farmers, linking back with the agri-managers to help get the nutrient budgets back to the farm for the past tense. So that's one angle that we're trying to cover off. Farm environmental plans we think are going to be quite problematic because of the intensity that they have to be developed with on farm. So maybe we'll be working as Ravensdown with the nutrient budget portion of that and relying on the farmer and maybe the support agencies such as the industry bodies like Dairy NZ, Foundation for Arable Research, Beef and Lamb, to help put frameworks and templates together for farmers that they can really take their own steps to establish a farm environmental plan, or say in the case of dairy industry, a sustainable milk plan with each farmer. So I think if the farming industry was to rely too heavily on external consultants for that, it would really, the capacity is just not there to see that through.
We're very good at doing letters to mean a word. What the hell is MGM?
MGM is a different concept again. MGM is, in the Canterbury environment, Canterbury context, is a new layer that they're looking at on top of their current regional planning regime, which is called Matrix for Good Management. It's looking at best practice, and a lot of those best practices will be incorporated into the farm environmental plan. That side of it, I think, could work quite well. Where it gets rather more complex is to establish the MGM process. They're looking to take nutrient budgets and flow them through into a portal, and that portal will then tell you what level of nutrients your type of farming system should be emitting or not emitting, and then farming within that. So the complexity around that is yet to be elaborated on, in that we'd have to wait for a plan change for that to come through. But there's still plenty of work in that space that Environment Canterbury and sector groups have been working on. But in all fairness, it's another layer of complexity that will take some getting used to by the industry, the farming industry and those that service the farming industry.
Richard, what's going to happen if it doesn't happen because there's a lack of feet on the ground?
In the worst case, the farm is left not compliant, and that's not ideal. Usually with these situations, some pragmatism comes through, and the councils would also have to recognise what limitations are there. Some of the regulatory changes they can make also improve that situation. For instance, simple things like rules that say you must do an annual nutrient budget versus rules that might say do it every 3 years if your farm context hasn't changed too much. So we've seen some involvement in evolving of plans to cover that. For instance, the Salmon Te Waihora subzone plan of Environment Canterbury has put a little bit more scope in there not to need everything annually. So in the end, I suspect it falls back to the regulators to also make their plans practical and implementable. At the moment, I think there's a little bit of a gap in that positioning.
Richard, can you just recap on what Ravensdown's doing either voluntarily or now for sort of paid advice and help?
Well, yeah, that's the thing. We've had to move away from volunteering in what would normally be bundled into a service that farmer shareholders might have previously expected from Ravensdown, to do everything just as part of, shall we say, overheads that are covered by fertiliser, is not tenable anymore. It's also not tenable because of the differences in different council areas and different sectors and the way they're being targeted. So we've really had to look at that offer more specific to meet each farmer's requirements, whether they be needing a consent or justifying their case not to need a consent. So as I kind of covered off before, developed the Ravensdown environmental team, which is a kind of very specialist team that goes in like as a consultant and works through that process with farmers. And then some other levels we were trying to integrate more with our current agri managers and what they're doing, and that would be more like helping with the baselines. But at this stage, can't see how we would get too heavily involved in the farm environmental plans. It would just be too daunting.
Traceability?
Traceability, I think there's a great developments there that we are really making life a bit easier. You probably have heard of the Ravensdown Smart Maps now, and the GIS system and platforms we've been building there, and that's a great starting point to have the farm well mapped, to be able to load information onto that farm, keep track of your data that way. It goes in right through to traceability, where the farm spreader may be sending its data back to those files and building up the picture of what nutrients have gone on. They're really good tools for helping to understand the farm, to block the farm correctly, to attach the overseer records to really good data gathering point, because so much of what we're talking about here is for the long term. So having good data and being able to justify your farming operation year by year and those changes is important. So a lot of work with our information technology department over pretty much 15 years now to get to this point. Very, very important.
Finally, agri-managers, I guess they've just got a whole lot more work to have to do.
Well, yes, the agri-managers still we want to keep their focus on using overseer more in the predictive, looking towards next season, helping to model the nutrients that will be required, obviously in the context of any environmental constraints that might be there. But so their function is obviously to understand the farm and work with the future. Where we're having to fill the gaps is how to deal with the past and do nutrient budgets that it might be more required for regulatory purposes, which are looking backwards, not forwards.
Is it mission impossible?
It's a mission ultra challenge. And look, if every council in New Zealand, regional council, was to layer out the intensity of rules and changes we're seeing in the Canterbury context, it would be mission impossible. So we're hoping that pragmatism will prevail, and working closely with the regional councils around New Zealand, we can strike that middle point which we can actually deliver on as an industry, a service industry, and rural professionals can deliver as well.